Welcome to the Institute for Automotive Business Excellence tips, and this is tip number 21, weekly numbers that we would look at. We talked about daily numbers in tip number 20. I'm actually only going to add a couple of numbers from the daily numbers to the weekly numbers. So we talked about sales as one of our numbers. I look at sales daily. I also look at sales weekly. I want to know that if I have a goal of selling 30,000 this week, that I'm hitting that goal, I'm reaching that goal, and if I'm watching it daily, I'm pretty sure weekly that I'll see what I want to see. We're looking at average repair order over the day and over the week. And oh, by the way, I'm going to reiterate in the last tip, we talked about don't get nervous about one bad day. I would also tell you don't necessarily get nervous about one bad week. You can get a little nervous, just don't get paranoid. So average repair order is kind of a weekly number, and the longer the numbers, the longer the time span, the more accurate the numbers become. So we look at averages for weeks together as we look at our monthly numbers, and then as we look at our annual numbers, we look at all the weeks averaged. So that's an important thing. We look at average repair order. I'm not going to tell you what I think that needs to be. We did that in a previous tip. And then we also look at productivity. Because if we sell work but we don't produce it, we're in trouble. Another number that we look at weekly would be car count. I want to make sure that we're keeping our car count up and we're keeping our car count steady. Now, daily, we're not going to see patterns. And frankly, even weekly, for 1 week or 2 weeks, we're not going to see patterns. But the cool thing about keeping some weekly numbers, we have a cool spreadsheet that does this for our clients and our group members that we work with. Keeping a nice spreadsheet on the weekly numbers that are key to you will start to show you patterns. So when you see high car count, we'll actually often see low average repair order, or we might see low productivity, and that would tell us where our good car count is. So car count becomes one of the numbers that we look at and we compare week to week. I don't really look at car count daily, although I kind of pay attention to it a little bit. So car count is a weekly number that we would look at. And next on the list would be margin. I want to make sure that we're holding our margin, and this would be parts and labor and net. So we got our gross profit, GP, monthly. Then we have our parts profit, which is part of what makes up our gross profit. We have our labor profit, which is part of what makes up our gross profit. And we have our net profit. My expectation of gross profit is 62%. My expectation of parts profit is 58%. My expectation of labor profit is 64%. And my expectation of net profit is 20%. So these are the numbers that I'm looking for. Now I pay attention to these weekly. So I want to run a weekly report that shows me what my cost of labor was, which would include a load. Now weekly, it bears saying here that there's two types of numbers that I look at. I look at profit and loss statements when I get them monthly. Those are the accurate numbers that I pay taxes on. They should be extremely accurate. But I also have a series of management numbers. Management numbers are different. They're not necessarily 100% accurate. So in my weekly number, I take my cost annually, my fixed expenses annually, I divide it by 52 and I put it into every week. I do, however, put my labor cost for my technicians and I put my cost for my salespeople into that because I want to look at my labor margins and I want to look at, I put my parts cost and my parts sales because I want to look at my parts margins also. And so I need to have some basis for that. And that would mean I have to put my sales in for parts, my sales in for labor, my cost for parts, and my cost for labor. Now, instead of trying to figure out weekly, how much did I pay this guy for workers' comp and how much did I pay him when I put in his 401k, I just use a multiplier. And the multiplier I use is 1.3, and it gets me a fairly accurate number for the cost. So if I paid this guy, $1,000, I multiply times 1.3, and by the time I paid for the uniforms and the FICA and the FUTA and the workers' comp and the vacation days and the holidays and the sick days and all of that stuff. It's really about 1,300. So that gives me a number that's accurate enough that I can pay attention to it and I can see what's going on. Now, also kind of a caution here, what I'm really looking for more in my weekly numbers is trend. So what I'm looking at over the course of 3 months or 4 months is what is the trend? Is my car count staying up? Is it going up? Is it coming down? Is my average repair order going up? Is it coming down? When I have high car count, what happens to my average repair order? What happens to my sales? What happens to my productivity? And I'm starting to try to determine the relationships that are happening between these numbers and decide really what's the best number for me weekly. So by paying attention to the right numbers weekly, you can really start to see that, well, when I go over 54 cars, I actually have a lot more work, but we don't get anything done. We work a lot harder for less. So those are the weekly numbers that I look at. Thank you for your time and have a wonderful day.